The browser has been the front door for consumers.
Yeah.
And so that has just historically been such an important property to own.
Well, welcome back to VBSR. So good to be back. I'm sorry I missed you guys last
I was
week.
going to say, welcome back to you. You were missed and we didn't have you. And I'm so happy to have you back. So it's a true welcome back.
I think you had an upgrade there.
I did steal your seat. I don't know if you've seen the cut
You
yet.
swapped?
But I
Oh, wow.
swapped. I swapped.
Well,
It's exciting.
I hear you had Carrie on. So Carrie's our newest partner on the
Yeah.
early stage team, and she has been exploring all types of categories in and
Yeah.
around AI and healthcare. And she comes from such a great background. I mean, she was a former founder.
Right.
Which, it's always so funny when everyone goes around the room and describes their background as former founders, and then it comes to me, and I have zero substance to.
Except a career dedicated to this craft.
Right,
So,
exactly,
you know,
yeah. Just
yeah.
yeah. It is a funny flip from being an operator to being
Yeah.
an investor full time. I notice among my friends that make that switch. You can look at the industry from the outside in with rose tinted glasses. You obviously are able to fund any number of companies. It's the cliche that we get to take many bets and founders only have one bet. They sit with an N of one, we sit with an N of many. But I think when you get into the job of doing VC and early stage investing in particular, you realize how competitive it is out there. I mean, for the
Right.
best and brightest folks,
Right.
how complex it is to make the right decision. I mean, we operate with very, very limited data,
Yeah.
and we're also trying to find companies that can and want to go the distance. And
Yeah.
I probably find that one of the most difficult things in this era in particular. Of just there's so many founders, and I think behind those founders there's so many different motivations.
Right.
And really digging in and understanding why someone wants to start a company, what's the reason for this business to exist,
Right.
has been the toughest thing for me. But Carrie, I really appreciate. I remember one of the first partner meetings we had with her. She asked that question. She's like, "Why does this founder want to start this company? What's the motivating fuel in their engine that gets them up in the morning that wants to build this thing?" And
Right.
that's an important reminder for us.
Yeah, no, I think that that former founder experience definitely puts her in a position to be both connect and relate with founders, but also on some of those margins, to be quite discerning. I think the challenge in the industry is there's just such survivorship bias.
Yeah.
And so kind of what you see coming out the end is just not indicative of like the process at the early stage, which to your point is just super, super messy and super, super noisy. When it's as eager as the market is now, I think you can get more of a spectrum of motivations.
Yeah.
And so that discernment is that much more important.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Let's see. I was thinking about this past week, all the news that was coming out from Perplexity and Microsoft and the browser company. What's really interesting is we are in this post-agent world now, but it feels like the browser is cool again. I mean, there's so much innovation happening
Right.
within the browser. There are acquisition offers happening for incumbent browsers.
Right.
And I thought it'd be fun to just unpack that a little bit. I don't know if you've played around with Comet from
Yeah.
Perplexity,
Yeah.
Asterisk,
Yeah.
darling Excel portfolio company.
Right.
But,
Right. Of course.
yeah, it's a powerful piece of software.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you think about some of the, iconic brands throughout technology, the Silicon Valley arc, and they've almost exclusively sort of like held the front door. The browser has been the front door for consumers,
Yeah.
and so that has just historically been such an important, property to own. It was it's the cover of the New York Times. And for a long time, right, the Yahoo page looked like the cover of the New York
Sure.
Times,
Yeah.
and now it's certainly evolved a lot. But I think there's reasons for it to still be, a darling, for sure.
I was using Comet over the last week and a half, 2 weeks at this point, and it's it is remarkably powerful. At a minimum, it sort of absolves me of the need to navigate through all these websites that maybe don't have the best
Right.
user interface. So,
Totally.
I've built my own automations to book pickleball and tennis courts on the SF Parks and Rec
I love
website.
it. Top of the priority list.
Top of the priority list. And yeah, I mean, it's just, it manifests in me this sense of possibility of
Yeah.
like, wow, consumer automation has always been one of the promises here with
Yeah.
AI, and now we actually have kind of an application to build those automations, and so I've been using it. I mean, pretty much every day over the last 2 weeks. It's got some really cool functionality. It can read into your inbox, your email. It can
Yeah.
draft responses for you.
Yeah.
It definitely highlights maybe the ongoing need or role of UI
Yeah.
in a person's life, which for me is almost this notion of like verifiability.
Yeah.
I can automate something, but how trusting am I of the agent to fully execute the task end to end? It's the metaphor of going from level 2 self-driving to level 5 to self-driving. How ready are we as consumers to just fully not pay attention to the road and
Right.
take our hands off the steering wheel? It has me thinking about the ongoing evolving role of the browser. And I almost wonder if we have proclaimed its death prematurely. We just presume that agents are going to operate on our behalf, but no, I think there's still a really important role for the browser.
Yeah. The browser, in my opinion, will still have a large role to play. And I think in part because there are places where it still delivers a lot of utility. I think there's probably a category of things that are sort of, either could work, right? But there's just like human behavior and human preferences that the reality is those takes way longer to evolve than I think we maybe realize in this area of the world. I think the other like surface area that probably, ends up having like share shift here is email. A lot of the things that we see, and probably the chat UIs, right? It's like the assistants who are sometimes like direct access, and then sometimes trying to say, hey, let me just like skip over this SaaS player and take it straight to your inbox and I'll do the work for you.
Right.
And currently that doing the work for you is interfacing with an external UI. But it wouldn't have to be, right? For it to end up back in your inbox and say, hey, I already placed the order, or hey, I followed up to get you the refund, or whatever that executed task is. You don't care if they interface with a UI or not.
Right.
And so I think there's a bucket of things that will so slowly transition from accessing some sort of interface to just going straight to a database and being able to execute it. And a lot of those, I think, will end up emerging in inbox or your sort of companion assistant. And maybe that's where a lot of the fight sort of plays out across these different, the power law of your time.
Right.
What
right.
am I showing up to each day to do the core of my work? Am I showing up to some browser to execute tasks? Am I showing up to my inbox to see what's been done and what needs to be done? Am I talking to a companion who's giving me that summary?
Yeah, sure.
A few modalities that seem quite credible in the moment. And so finding the tasks that are best suited for which modality, I think, is sort of an interesting thing at hand for founders today.
Yeah, it's interesting. The inbox was the original ticketing system in some ways.
Right.
I had some really interesting companies this week that were almost creating agents with cron jobs. So, let's say you're looking for a Nintendo Switch 2, which I've been looking for a Nintendo Switch 2. I can't find it anywhere. If anyone out there knows where to get one, please let me know. But, oftentimes that just means like paying attention to the right e-commerce sites and being there the moment that there's new inventory. And so how could you automate that and set triggers to, execute that task on some schedule, every night at 5 p.m. I want you to go check Best Buy and Costco and Walmart and see if there's any new inventory. But there has to be some output for that. And I think it's really interesting the thread that you're on of that output could probably just be a ticket. And that ticket is probably going to be an email because that's where most of my other kind of consumer tickets live in effect.
It's interesting, this space where we're wanting things to execute things on our behalf. And, there was discussion recently of scraping and security architecture, and some of the architecture that has built up to stop people from, blasting reservation sites or blasting, it's like some of these things that we're talking about as really amazing utility that agents can do for us are the things that, people have built up security architecture to avoid the bots, right? And now it's like, oh, we welcome these bots, these friendly bots, And so what is a bot? What is a helpful agent executing a task that you have asked them to do?
Right.
Where is the line? There's sort of a decoupling of a lot of the security architecture that's been trained to understand when this isn't, visibly being done by a human, this is bad. And that zone, it has really shifted, which I think is interesting to see how the security ecosystem is trying to iterate very quickly to sort of welcome, but understand how to still enforce security while sort of engaging with the agentic world.
That's probably the most interesting thing I've observed about the consumer prosumer agent companies is running into that security apparatus. To your point, so much of web security has been built to detect bad actors, even bots.
Yeah.
And, agents that are now operating as our proxy effectively have to confront the fact that, a website is designed to recognize a browser session and to deliver you a cookie that is potentially timestamped. And, if it doesn't recognize that session from Sarah or Vas, it's going to kick you back out into some authentication process. And suddenly you sort of lose the benefit and the beauty of automation altogether when you have to, 2FA or, punch in the 6-digit code that just hit your text box.
Right.
And all of that is going to need to be reimagined. I mean, this was something that we were talking about today in our partner meeting of just what is agentic auth going to look like? How do we give an agent our proxy as an end user? How do we allow them to authenticate into our web services, potentially purchase on our behalf, fill in PII on our behalf? And all of that, to your point, kind of runs afoul of the incumbent web security architecture that we've sort of built over the last 2 decades plus.
Yeah, it's interesting. All these models, right, were trained on all the historical output that was sort of like static, like end product, right? And it feels like all these RL environments, it's like, well, now we want to train on the like in process, the work product actions as opposed to this sort of look back static, creations, the YouTube video, the web page. We want to see all the activity and use that as our training. And I think there's been a lot of folks building up sort of specialized data sets where, paying people to produce that, obviously. But sort of the recognition that like so much of this trading data is it's just happening in real time.
Sure.
If you own the property and you can, capture it as it's happening, what an advantage,
Yeah, and to make it really tangible, for those who aren't familiar with RL training environments, it's effectively a browser session with whatever content you need to train that agent. So let's say you want an agent to operate on your behalf in Salesforce. Okay, well, you need an instance of Salesforce. You need data within that instance. You need integrations to the extent that you want to trigger automations or whatnot. You need that instance to be able to interface with your kind of proprietary corporate environment. And so that is a whole kind of package. It's a petri dish that one has to fill before you plant the organism into that petri dish and actually see if it can thrive and grow.
Right.
And so we're meeting just so many great companies that are thinking about building that, canonical environment for companies that are deploying agents to train and simulate in.
Right.
And then also a lot of the big labs companies that obviously want to own more and more of these enterprise workflows. They want to know that their agents can operate in these complex environments. What is this concept of headless software going forward? What is the role of UI?
Right.
In what use cases where UI be really important? And you mentioned this before. I mean, there's going to be utility for the browser.
Yeah.
And in what cases can UI or the browser just fade to the background.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that kind of got me excited this week was thinking about the role of the browser going forward. It is this unit of infrastructure for an agent. Whether an agent is training inside of it or
Right.
it is operating on top of it, it doesn't feel like browsers are going to be going away anytime soon.
Right. The evolution of this happened slow and fast all at once.
Yeah.
Did you see that AOL just announced that they're discontinuing
I
dial-up
saw
internet?
that. Oh my gosh.
September
I shed
30th,
a-
2025.
I shed
So
a tear.
it feels funny in this moment to be talking about, in some ways, like, what is it the end of the browser? Is there longevity to the browser? It's
Yeah.
like, for sure there's longevity to the browser.
Yeah.
If dial up is just, we're saying things, Right. But I think it's going to evolve,
Yeah.
I think we've talked a lot about how it's gotten so much cheaper to produce software. And in some ways, the vibe coding we've talked about, I think in some ways we will get more dynamic UI and potentially more of a multitude of experiences at the browser level.
Yeah.
In some ways that was a little bit like the original browsers where we're going to presume the front page of the New York Times to we're just going to have one box and it's sort of choose your own adventure. You tell us what you want,
Yeah.
But that was a very sort of ask and answer, structure. Whereas now I think evolving into a certainly more personalized, full utility, full execution, not just like information retrieval.
I think I saw someone tweet, could you imagine Salesforce or Workday allowing end users to have some sort of lovable like interface? If they own the system of record, they have all the data, how can they expose that to you with whatever kind of look and feel that you want? And that's kind of interesting to think about just how custom software is going to be going forward.
Totally.
What do incumbent SaaS companies, what is their role in this agentic future? And yeah, I think it ties together a lot of the themes that we're talking about right now.
Right.
The role for software, the need for a browser, the current set of consumer expectations around how to interface with applications.
Right.
We're not fully ready to just hand functions off to an agent. We still
Right.
want some visual command and control of software. And so I don't know, I was also wondering, like, have we just overshot a bit in terms of, putting the nail in the coffin on old school incumbent SaaS?
I think we have to maybe parse like the old school companies from SaaS.
Yeah.
Because I think part of what's getting rolled together there is this idea of, and not picking on any one of them, but like can Monday.com turn into an AI first company from the vantage point that they're in? And I think a recognition that in some cases they just haven't been built for the current moment. Won't speak to the specifics there. And so I think there's a bit of a existential moment for that crop of companies to sort of understand how can they evolve into this current vintage. Then there's like the current vintage, and is there value there? Which I think is some ways more interesting for us because it sort of asks the question, what is defensible long term?
Right.
What is the value that will accrue to the application layer?
Yeah.
I think that is probably a more interesting discussion. People still want an easy button. They still crave like a completed solution.
Yeah.
And so, and I recognize it was harder, but it's not like everybody went out and built their own apps when like the App Store emerged. They kind of let the market of people evolve into satisfying a lot of these like prosumer needs. And so I think there's more of just like a persona thing of like who's going to have the appetite for building their own stuff. And I think there will still be a very large part of the population that wants something that is baked, but baked and like dialed,
Yeah.
And I think we're in a new moment where the expectations of the dialed output
Yeah.
is way, way higher. But I don't think that it means that everybody's just gonna DIY everything, you know? And I think we've seen this too, where like the gap between some of the vibe coding and something that's like a scalable solution, there is a gap there.
Right.
And so you might be able to validate something, but can you really build the thing that's gonna take you the distance? And so I think a lot of the new SaaS applications are gonna play in that space of where, yeah, maybe it's easy to validate, hard to actually execute to that like dialed resolution.
Yeah, I think that's so well said. It's, in addition to a product being fully fleshed out, it's also just the ongoing development cost and operating costs. You know, it's one thing to build software, it's another thing to operate software. And I think we are probably undershooting how complex it is and what the true total cost of ownership is to maintain and scale these applications over time, because bugs happen, you know. As applications scale, you have to scale the back end. You got to add more capacity in your database. Downtime happens, you know. No matter what, whether it's vibe coded or not, AWS can go down. And so what do you do in those moments? There is complexity to operating software that you know, is probably getting lost in the conversation around you know, what is the future of SaaS? I mean, ultimately, software exists to solve a business problem.
Yeah.
And there's just a question of how much of that problem do you want to outsource to your vendor? Some may say, hey, we actually just want to outsource a little bit of it, and we want to own a majority of that problem. And I think, you know, this era of codegen is going to really benefit them.
Yeah.
But I think, to your point, there's so many companies in the world and so many end users out there who want it all figured out for them, and they do want the easy button. And you know, it's incumbent on us as investors to figure out, you know, who are the companies that are going to thrive in that world.
Yeah, right. Where is it durable?
Yeah.
In some ways, I think this actually is part of the backlash around the GPT-5 launch, which is they're operating in a world where it is trying to satisfy, you know, all use cases, really, right? And so you end up with folks who are disappointed as they tune the dial across, like, how friendly should we be? How like data, how agreeable should we be? Well, in certain contexts, you want it to be super agreeable, and in other contexts, you actually don't want it to. And you don't want to have to go to the trouble to be like explicit about it every time. And that's the type of thing that a software layer that's explicitly built for a particular purpose that can have all of that, you know, dialed into the solution out the gate, where the sort of broad-based, you know, kind of come here and do anything. It's very hard to satisfy everyone in that context.
That's a great point. That's a great point. I mean, you know, the role of the software company in this situation is to almost pull out the business logic from the customer and manifest that logic into a piece of software. And no matter how easy it is to now prompt your way to a SaaS application, that implies that you also know how to express your business logic. And it's almost like getting out of your own head to look at the problem from the outside in to figure out how to encode that logic into a piece of software. Salesforce is really good at that. Workday is really good at that. Monday.com is really good at that. And, you know, until these vibe coding platforms can help us with that process, which I wouldn't put it past them, just given how good the AI is getting. But until we can actually like express our business logic in a really coherent way that can then translate into software, we're for certain always going to need kind of that outside third party, you know, helping us to build these things. Awesome as always to chat with you, Sarah. There is so much happening, changing. Even in the dog days of August, it feels like there's a new piece of news to be reacting to every day. So fun to try to understand it together with you, and we're looking forward to hanging out again on our next episode.
Absolutely. Good to see you as always.